Hi, I'm Thomas Bowles, Prince William County Agricultural Extension Agent. Welcome to our video.
Hello, welcome everyone. I'd like to thank you for joining us for today's webinar. My name is Jay Yankee. I'm the District Manager with the Prince William Soil and Water Conservation District. We have partnered with the Virginia Cooperative Extension to present today's webinar, Water Equality, Sustainability, and Access for All, with our very special guest presenter, Renee Hoyos. Renee Hoyos is the new Director of Environmental Justice at the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. Prior to joining DEQ, Hoyos was the Executive Director of the Tennessee Clean Water Network, an organization focused on identifying, preventing, and remedying water pollution through civic engagement, partnership building, and advancing water policy. We are very grateful to have Renee with us today to discuss environmental justice and natural resources conservation. Just a little bit of housekeeping before we get started. If you have any questions during today's presentation, please type them into the chat box. We will have time at the end of the presentation to answer questions and discuss the presentation. We ask that microphones be muted and cameras be turned off to save bandwidth. Before we get started, we have a quick poll about environmental justice for everyone to answer. You should see that on your screen in just a moment.
Okay, so people are answering, do you think water quality issues are being fairly addressed in your community? Okay, I'm going to end it and share the results. So a lot of people disagree. They do not think water quality issues are being fairly addressed in our community. Okay, thank you all for answering.
All right, well, with thanks for everybody for answering the poll. Without further ado, I'm pleased to introduce Renee Hoyos, and I'm going to turn things over to her. Thank you, Renee.
Okay, let's get this show on the road here. Yes? Everybody
Yes,
says yes, but they're on mute. And I can only see my screen, so great. Okay, cool. I know there's usually a delay with Zoom, but yeah, thank you all for having me speak to you today. I've been getting lots of requests to speak, and I was certainly happy to speak to all of you doing work with soil conservation and water conservation. And my name is Renee Hoyos, and I am the new Environmental Justice Director for the Department of Environmental Quality. Here at the Department of Environmental Quality, I just was hired at the end of April. And so we've been spending, this is a new office, and not only did we get my office, but we got some resources. So we're getting, just getting our ducks in a row, but we have accomplished a few things that I think you'll be interested in hearing about. I think that was going to happen. Next slide. I always like to start my talks out with this this image, and I know that a lot of you, if not all of you, have already seen it, but it's illustrative of environmental justice and equity and what all the terms mean and how they can play out. So for this particular graphic, we have three identical stick figures who are trying to enjoy the view, and there's a fence. Now, through no fault of their own, these three identical stick figures are on different elevations, so that one stick figure can see okay, one might be able to if it jumps, and the one on the lower elevation can't see at all. And you know, this is a typical frame of injustice, that some people are able to enjoy things and other people just aren't, through no fault of their own particularly. So in order to meet the goal of all the stick figures being able to view, to look at the view, I think we like to think about, well, we'll just give everybody the same resources, right? We're going to give everybody the same thing because it's fair and it's equal. And so what that has done in this frame under equality is that the stick figure that could already see the view has a better view. The figure in the middle can now see pretty well, but not everyone can see the view, even with the identical amount of resources. And so we still have one stick figure that can't see the view. So under equity, what we do is we say, the goal is not to give equal resources. The goal is to make sure everyone enjoys the view. And so for that, some of the stick figures need a little bit more help than others. And so the stick figure that's on the lowest elevation gets an extra boost. The one in the middle gets a medium boost, and the one that can already see, well, they can already see. And then in the final frame under justice, the barrier to seeing the view is removed. The fence is removed. And if you notice, resources aren't particularly an issue once the barrier is removed. And so as we talk about this in our agencies, and as DEQ has been pondering equality, equity, and justice, I think that we can safely say that the Department of Environmental Quality can provide the community a measure of equality. Folks have been saying they want meaningful engagement. They want to know about projects in their community earlier before, so that they can know about it earlier. And I think we can provide that. But is that really helping the problem? Or are we just giving them the bad news earlier? So if we looked at an equity frame, what would that be? And we think that it could be that communities have a stake in the outcome early. And that under a justice frame, perhaps in some communities, certain types of activities just aren't allowed. And there's precedent for that. There are some cities that say, you can't have a confined animal feeding operation within X number of miles of the city. So it's not out of the realm of possibility that we could actually be more protective of communities than we are in this justice frame. And now that we know this and we're educated about this, we have to ask ourselves, do we care enough to do anything about it? Because in the world of environmental justice, it's not really about your intentions or how much you know. It's really about the outcomes of your actions. And I would say in the Commonwealth that we do care here in Virginia. The Environmental Justice Act of 2020 was passed, and that calls for fair and meaningful engagement of the communities that will be receiving these burdens. We have a chief officer of equity, diversity, equity, and inclusion, Dr. Janice Underwood. That is a cabinet level position in the Northam administration, and she reports directly to him. And she has been requiring all the agencies to have diversity, equity, and inclusion plans for all of their programs. We have an interagency environmental justice working group, and that working group was created. It was already sort of a standalone working group, but then it was rather codified in the Environmental Justice Act. And it's comprised of 4 secretariats, 18 departments, and 2 environmental groups. Also, we have the Virginia Environmental Justice Council, which has 21 organizations, and they send representatives to the interagency working group. We really feel like equity and justice cannot just be provided by one agency. And though DEQ has environment in their name and folks are looking to DEQ, we really need the help of all of our partners working together for environmental justice. Often, DEQ doesn't find out about projects until the project is almost at its end of its planning stage. And economic development meets with the municipality or the local government, and they work out the zoning, and then they work out the tax increment financing and the payment in lieu of taxes. They break ground, they cut ribbons, they promise jobs, and then they come to DEQ and say, we need a permit because we're going to have a discharge and we're behind schedule. And the community finds out about it. Sometimes the community has been following along and being thwarted through all those processes, but oftentimes as well, communities find out about it when we find out about it. And what this has made for is a recipe for a pretty unpleasant public hearing where, the community is upset, and probably rightly so, to have to bear additional burdens. And industry just can't understand why the community doesn't want this. It's going to provide, jobs. And so we just have a lot of conflict. And that's why we need all of our agencies working together so that we can start thinking about how do we want to move forward? How do we want to grow in the Commonwealth economically and still protect our vulnerable communities, many of which have had disinvestment for hundreds, sometimes years. So this is the challenge that we're all facing. And so when I talk to folks about this, I want you to know that while we think it's great that, I have an office and I'll be staffing up, it's really important that we all think about how we interact in our agencies to make sure that environmental justice moves forward. So what is DEQ doing specifically? Well, I think in 2019, we solicited a study. It's called the SKIO report. It's on the DEQ website. And you can get there by going to DEQ, click on About, and you'll see environmental justice. And all of the reporting commission reports are on that webpage. They recommended 9 specific things for us to consider as we create an environmental justice office. And they really focused around staff, authority, leadership, staff capacity, tools and information, how we build relationships in the community, and how we are going to interact with local government, because a lot of decisions are made in local government, as I said, and a couple of years later we get involved, but everything's kind of set in stone by then. So we have, like I said, created this office. I'm the director of the office. I have a deputy director, Jerome Brooks. We are now hiring, and in fact, the hiring closes tomorrow, but we are hiring 4 environmental justice coordinators and 2 communications coordinators to start working in the community. We're going to put them in 3 regional offices, Northern, Piedmont, and Tidewater, and then one will probably be in Central or maybe in the southwestern part of the state, to really start doing some good engagement, getting involved in the community, finding out who the leaders are, making sure that they know about issues as we know about them, and just trying to build relationships with the community. We have embarked on a strategic plan. We do it every 2 years. And this time the plan has an environmental justice and climate change focus. So we've had 18 2-hour meetings with every department in the agency to talk about ways that they can incorporate meaningful engagement into their day-to-day activities. Because I really want folks to be thinking about how do we incorporate environmental justice and not simply rely on an office. There needs to be a bit of a shift in thinking about how we deal with the public, who is, of course, our customer. And we just received a $200,000 EPA grant to create a Virginia environmental justice screening tool. It's a map, very similar to the environmental justice screening tool that EPA has. And we're going to develop an environmental justice academy. So those are the things we have on the surface of what we're doing. And like I said, I've only been here since, well, really the beginning of May. So we're starting to dive into our programs to see what we can be doing to provide equity and hopefully justice to our communities. Now, I know you wanted me to do a water quality, talk about water equity as well. I did work in Tennessee for 14 years on water quality issues. And one of the things that I noticed is, and one of the things that we're going to be looking at in our office is, where does DEQ's money go? Where are we focusing state revolving fund for the drinking water program and state revolving fund monies for the clean water program? Where does our grant funding go to? How are we being equitable in the dollars we're spending? And that's going to be coming up in the future. Because, communities that have been negatively impacted often have these really severe infrastructure problems. And I saw this in Tennessee. Williamson County, probably the wealthiest district, the wealthiest zip code in the country, was getting all the state revolving funds because they could afford a fancy consultant who could write really good plans, and they had the resources to implement these plans. But these little towns that are really being hammered by degrading septic, sewage treatment plants that haven't been maintained adequately for dozens of years, those folks weren't getting any funding. And how do we right that wrong? where are we monitoring our streams? Are we monitoring mostly in the recreation areas? Are we monitoring them in urban areas? Where is that going on? Where are we putting our dollars in training citizen monitors? Where are those dollars going? And so just recently we put out a call for a grant for citizen monitoring, and we've added some environmental justice points. So if folks are working in environmental justice communities, they will receive, or they are an organization that is an environmental justice community organization, that they'll get more points. So we're slowly going through our programs and trying to figure out, where can we do things programmatically that allow us to make these changes towards equity and justice, and what kinds of things are going to require legislation. And that's going to be ongoing for the next year or two. So with that, you can contact me anytime. That's my email. That's my direct line. That goes right to my state-issued cell phone. So please don't hesitate to call me or email me if you have any questions. And I'll take questions now until you're tired or we meet our hour limit.
Okay, this is Sonny. Renee?
Yes,
Yeah.
shall I stop sharing?
So here's, well, I guess it's not a question, I guess it's more of a concern. I have found in the last, I would say 6 to 8 months, that locally, some statewide events, as well as even at some things at the national level, people, until they look at water quality as like a box to break, a glass box to break, in an emergency situation when their land or their livelihood is being encroached on. So how do we, I guess, it's not to say it's a lifestyle, but make it more of an important, consistent issue, and not just, the glass box that people go to break, because it's like a last ditch effort. Everybody wants, a water quality, do a test, but.
Yeah. So do you mean, it's people don't consider it to be much of an environmental justice issue until it's like right in their face?
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is, there. And are you talking about the community or DEQ?
It's even, but I guess not DEQ, the community. And
The
I'm
community?
talking about, I've heard people not even address on a national level, not address water quality, local people, statewide issues. Okay, we got a problem here, so look at the water quality. But the water quality is a consistent concern, not, not because an emergency at the moment type thing. But how do we make people more aware or involved with it?
That's a great question, because I've noticed, so originally I'm from California, and we were keenly aware of water quality because we didn't have supply. Supply was always tenuous. And you come here where it rains all the time, and people just feel like, yeah, we just have water. Like it's not an issue for us. It's always here. So it's dry a few days, maybe a week, 2 weeks, it's going to rain again. And as you know, with climate change, that may not be the case as this climate changes. And so, I think it's important. Groups like yours can do a great job of doing outreach, of getting into the community and making people more aware of their resources. Another thing that I think we've done, and this is certainly in urban areas particularly, is that we hide all of our streams. They go into culverts and then we build over them. And I think the more you can get people into the resource, the more they want to protect it. And so daylighting streams is expensive, but it can be done. And I think if those projects are ever made available in your community, to really embrace them, because they're an opportunity to really start enjoying the resources. education programs in schools, getting the kids to really think about water quality is a great way to start that. As if you get them when they're young, they'll be thinking about this all through their lives. And so I see that really as an education thing. I wish our public schools had, the resources to provide really interesting and meaningful environmental education. And hopefully we'll be getting to that point, so that water quality doesn't become something that, well, the water quality is always bad, that we can start thinking about how we want to improve water quality, how we want to protect the good water quality that we have and improve the water quality that isn't good, which frankly was the goal of the Clean Water Act. You can kind of divide the Clean Water Act into two sections: keeping clean water clean and, making the dirty waters clean. And we have missed the 84, 87 goal of fishable and swimmable, but I don't think that's an excuse to stop working on water quality.
Renee, we've got a couple of questions from the chat. One is, are you going to solicit feedback from external stakeholders for the DEQ strategic plan?
Yeah, we're gonna, we're gonna be doing that. We're also, every time we make a decision in our office, we reach out to the community first. So we're very much involved with the Environmental Justice Collaborative. We're working with them. If you have not gone to their website and checked out their map, they're trying to create a map of narratives in their community. So they're telling stories about what it's like to live in these environmental justice communities. And as kind of an interesting story, during one of the strategic planning meetings that we had, one of those 2-hour meetings, staff had been saying, we look at data, but data can be very flat. Like, we don't know what it's like to live in these areas. And I'll be darned, that map made the news that day. And so we're going to be supporting that effort to really enhance the narrative of what it's like to live in an environmental justice community, so staff here can really have a 360 view when they're looking at applying permits. So we've been updating the collaborative. We meet with them regularly every 2 months. I'm kind of hoping that we'll go to every month, because I think so much is happening and moving so quickly that I want to make sure that they're engaged and they understand, all that's coming up that we're working on and that is coming up in DEQ.
Okay, we have a question about the Virginia Environmental Justice Screen Tool.
Mm-hmm.
What additional layers of information will be on the Virginia tool compared to what's on the EPA national tool?
Well, we really want some specific Virginia data that's a little bit more granular than the data that the feds have. So, and we'd certainly we'd like to put as much data as we've got that can be converted into shape files, so that people can look at their community and they can see a whole robust set of data from DEQ. This does bring up an interesting point. Mapping has become very popular. I think in many ways it was always popular, but now because we have so many really cool online tools, it's just become more accessible. And people really do want this spatial data because it does tell an interesting story. You can put, a layer of water pollution, VDP. It's the NIPTES program for Virginia. You can look at the permits. You could put a heat island effect layer on top. You could put a redlining layer on top, and you can see, what kinds of decisions are being made in communities. And I think it's going to be really informative. The one caution I have is that we don't turn into armchair advocates and just rely on mapping. None of these tools are called screening tools for a reason, because they are really a first pass. And then once you say, oh yeah, looks like this area could be problematic, then we have these 4 coordinators who will be deployed into the community to start letting folks know about what's going on, try to funnel them into granting programs that can help fix their problems, make sure that we've got lines of communication open when things are starting to happen in their community. What it probably won't have are things like housing data or transportation data so much. And the interagency group, which is meeting on Monday, and it's a public meeting, so you can go to town hall and get the details there. We're going to be talking about these tools, and if the housing department puts up an EJ tool, an EJ screen tool, and transportation does, and emergency management does, then we're asking people to bounce around to different websites and it becomes inefficient. It really doesn't tell a complete story. So I think that's one of the questions they'll be grappling with this year is how to, where do we want to put all this stuff? Do we want a one-stop shop or do we want to keep it diffuse? So probably for our map, you may not see like housing stock data, but you will probably see air quality data, water quality data, funding data, heat maps. There are several communities where the red line maps are available. And I think those are really important because, redlining wasn't the start, but it certainly was a time in which systemic racism just really kind of snapped into focus and it became very targeted. So, you look at these communities and you say, okay, within these communities, we are going to, it was purposeful. We're going to exclude these communities from funding and from all these services because of the people that live there. And how much of that bleeds over into, what we do now? Have assumptions been made and then just been embedded in our decision making, and we don't even realize it really. But hopefully by looking at mapping and looking at where things are targeted, we can get a better idea of how that's manifested itself over the years.
Yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Let's see. We want to go on to John. You want to unmute yourself and ask your question? So you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much. John Steinbach. I'm the Community Coordination Chair of the Prince William NAACP. I'm happy to see Victor Angry on, Maria Burgos, Kim Hosen, who's one of the leaders of the environmental groups here. I just want to say that our county is second or third largest county or in terms of numbers of people in the state. And according to the 2020 census, we're the 10th most diverse community in the entire United States. And I think that may actually be understating it. So one of the things that NAACP and Virginia Environmental Alliance and Prince William Environmental Alliance and other groups have been doing is focusing on the issue of primarily of access of people of color to enjoying the recreational opportunities in Prince William County. And just so if you're not familiar with Ms. Hoyos, our county is roughly divided into urban areas, which are largely on the eastern end along the 95 corridor, along the Amtrak corridor, and then Manassas, the cities of Manassas and Manassas Park, and then the southern and western end of the county. And a lot of the green space, a lot of the recreational opportunities are separated from the more urban-oriented communities. And so there's that question. And then the question of people of color feeling comfortable out there and enjoying access to the environmental resources. So we've been focusing on that. So I'm wondering if you have any thoughts about this, because there are certain tensions between the West End and the East End, and sometimes the rhetoric gets kind of ugly. So do you have any thoughts or lessons for our particular situation?
Certainly, access to the outdoors has been limited for people of color. There's many barriers. Talk about fences. I mean, some of these communities are built with no access to green space. It's one of the reasons why they're hot. There's no tree planting in these communities like there is, or if there's tree planting, I think they don't see the maintenance that wealthier, whiter communities see. And I think, there's a lot of work going on in the Department of Conservation and Recreation and Conservation. Yeah. I'm new, I'm learning all these department names. When we're going to be working, part of our mapper is going to have an equity park mapper as well. And I know DCR, Conservation and Recreation, is working on trying to make it so that people are, I believe, a half an hour drive from a state park and a 10-minute walk from a city park, something like that. It's a really cool metric where they're trying to, devise parks and work on park issues really with that equity lens so that people have access to these parks. And so an equity mapper, a park equity mapper will be part of the project. And someone did ask if mapping for environmental justice is the tool I'm talking about. Mapping for environmental justice is the narratives map. And DEQ is going to provide some funding to support that effort. And our map with all our DEQ data will be, there'll be a link to our different maps. And if mapping for environmental justice, that's the EJ Collaboratives map. If they need any of our layers, they're happy to have them. The maps will be able to talk to each other. But I just think having the narratives is so important. But John, back to your question. I mean, I think that is something we need to be thinking about. I think we think of environmental justice only in this pollution frame, like who's getting polluted on. And there's so many other inequities in the system that we need to keep them all front of mind as we move forward.
Thank you. So our next question is, what are the markers or what are some markers of progress that you're hoping to achieve with your initiatives that will show that environmental justice is improving?
I think some of the markers that we want to see is that, we are more engaged in the community, that, staff is reaching out in a very proactive way, that, we're trying to figure out how to get a metric on this, but, there's been many years of, not having outreach staff to talk to the community, and that environmental justice or any kind of public outreach is always at the end of a project. And one of the markers is if we can get that process front loaded so the community is not the last thing you think of. Actually, the community should be the first thing you think of. And we really want to work with our economic development sister agencies to start thinking about how, when we're approaching economic development, how we can do that and not have the community be in the dark. And so one of the things I'd like to see is that, communities get an actual stake in the outcome, not just that they know about stuff early. I mean, we can do that, but I have to tell you, sometimes DEQ doesn't know about a project until, all the deals have been done. And then they come to us, with demands like, hurry up and get this permit. And then, we have 90 days. So we have a regulatory time frame that we have to operate under, and that regulatory time frame doesn't allow for community engagement even in the best of situations. So that community, it's got to be flipped so that community engagement is early in the process, as early as it can be. It would be really nice if these companies would consult with us first to say we might have these discharges, and then maybe we can help them not have a discharge, avoid a wetland, whatever. But like I said, we find out about this stuff late in the game. So we're trying to increase our ability to get closer to where those decisions are being made, making sure that the community hears about these things. And we are not going to come out of the gate like perfectly formed. And so I'm really hoping that, I can develop relationships with the community so that we can be working on how we can make these systems better. I'm happy to, try something. If it doesn't work, we'll try something else. I mean, I think we can't be afraid of mistakes now. I think we have to just sort of charge ahead and do the best we can. And if the outcome's not good, what do we need to do to change the situation so that the outcome becomes better? So earlier engagement in the process, which is going to require some things internally at DEQ that are going to have to be shifted around. Earlier engagement with our sister agencies around development and the federal agencies, which, my God, we are getting such great resources from the feds. I just got a press release that says we're going to be, many agencies are getting equity money, and lots of it, like 500 million, like big equity dollars to start righting these wrongs. So we've got good support from the feds. Just how do we get that to the ground? I know that there have been decades of distrust and suspicion with DEQ, and I don't dispute that. And so the job in the Environmental Justice Office is to, have an open channel of communication where people feel like they can call in. They may, you may not get the answer you want. You may not even get a complete answer. I mean, are we going to be okay with sitting with having incompleteness? I think DEQ always wants to have all the T's crossed and the I's dotted before they go out to the community. And I understand why they want that. Can we loosen up the restrictions on that so that we can have these early engagement conversations with the public. I'd like to see our website being much more interactive. I would like to, see that folks are contacting us, and not just me, and you can contact me anytime. I'll put my contact information in the chat. But we're going to have some extra staff, and hopefully they will be creating good community relationships so that we can be solving problems earlier. Or hopefully we won't have problems. Maybe we can fix these things early enough on that we don't have these environmental justice problems. And then, we need to think about righting previous wrongs. We need to think about how we are going to, put the community first in line for a while.
So we have a question about how DEQ conducts their Clean Water Act enforcement. The criteria that DEQ uses is somewhat opaque. I'm sorry, I'm reading through this question / comment. Would there be a benefit from a close review to determine whether it's equitable, and if not, how to improve it?
Yeah, we're going back to the enforcement manual. Enforcement's been doing that for a while, actually. And, one thing, EPA is making has put out some guidance about enforcement that they're thinking about doing, or that they are wanting us to look at enforcement and compliance with an equity lens. Compliance is really where it's at. Are these industries set up in environmental justice communities? Are they complying with the law? And if they're not, why not? And if they're not, and they're being recalcitrant, let's get enforcement in there. And so, as that guidance unfolds from the EPA, we'll be implementing it. But we are currently going through our manual, and we're tuning up stuff around enforcement. We have some really good enforcement folks at DEQ that really want to start and have been actually enforcing it. You just don't hear it that much. We don't do a lot of press around enforcement. We just don't. So, maybe getting the word out earlier about the kinds of enforcement actions that we're doing, and redoing the manual with an equity lens, working with the feds to make sure that we've got resources in place to do the work. And we also want to be careful that as we go into these communities, that we're also providing resources for small businesses that may be in non-compliance because they've got issues with capital. They can't do the kinds of cleanups that are being demanded because they don't have the money to do extra treatment or whatever the requirement would be. And so we certainly don't want to push local business out, but we do want to provide resources for local business if we can, when we can, so that we can actually help make them compliant. But with big industries that have a lot of money and they're just, not complying because they don't want to, then I think you're going to see some increased enforcement.
Let's see. Leslie had a question. I think you answered this about the Mapping for Justice tool different from, let's see, what else? Could you define green lining?
Yeah. Did I say green lining? I meant redlining.
You did say redlining. But the question is asking for...
Oh, please define green lining.
Yeah.
I have not heard that term. Can someone else define it for me? Does someone else want to tell me what that is? I've not heard green lining.
I heard it in one of the YouTube events that I was looking at it, and I didn't know if it was meaning in terms of like, well, I interpret it as, lack of green space in an area or in a population, or in a side of, like redlining segregates by zip code and economics. Well, my thought of green lining was to, lack of environmental green space in terms of a particular area, whether it was trees, nearby in an area. So that was my interpretation. So I didn't know.
Yeah, I'm using Google because I had not heard that term. So I'm going to look into that. Thank you for bringing that up, Sunny, because I'll take a look at that. Or somebody Shauna, efforts aimed at increasing investment in neighborhoods which have been redlined or otherwise disadvantaged specifically, especially in early years of boycotting of banks. Business practice of investing energy products and services in low-income minorities. Great. Yeah, there you go. We crowdsourced it. Thank you. Thank you, Shauna, for doing that. I appreciate that. There are new terms all the time. And so thank you for keeping me current.
Does anybody else have a question? I think that might have been the last.
I would like to attempt to ask a question if that's okay. And my son is playing with a Lego, so you might hear him in the background. But hi, Tiziana Bottino. I'm one of the director of Prince William County Soil and Water Conservation District. My question is more, I've seen efforts okay, so there's been some trouble for people that have been trying to comment on certain projects and regulatory decisions for the DEQ, especially when it comes to pipelines and things like that. Like there's been some people that had pipeline projects in their communities, and I've heard that they had to travel to another town or city just to give a comment, and then it wasn't available virtually. Then there's been, I'm sure you've heard of that situation, and then they're trying to push for a better process to comment on regulatory decisions. So I just kind of wanted to know where we are with that, and what's the plan to make first of all, so that people actually know what's going on, that people are informed that there are hearings, that there is opportunities to comment, and how to provide better access to people that normally can't access those meetings, first remotely, or even just to not do it in a completely different city.
Yeah, that's a great question. I'm glad you're giving me the opportunity to explain it, because it is an interesting regulatory process that hasn't really, I think we've had a hard time explaining it. So it used to be that folks really wanted hearings in the place where the impact was going to happen. That was always the big push, right? And so people wanted in-person meetings. And in fact, we are required by FOIA to only have meetings of boards that make, citizen boards and boards that make decisions that affect the Commonwealth, have to be in person. A couple of members can be late, but the quorum has to be in person. And so then comes the pandemic, and the governor had a health executive order that just basically said, we're all going to, shelter in place while this virus is going on. And so FOIA was then suspended. And luckily we had all this great technology that we could have these meetings online. And then we discovered the great joy of having meetings online. You don't have to drive anywhere. You don't have to find parking or pay for it. You don't have to pay for gas. You don't have to pay for a meal. You don't have to sit in an uncomfortable room, and it just was much easier. And we had great participation in that time because you could do it on Zoom. Well, then the health order was lifted and we had to go back to FOIA, which required in-person meetings or meetings that were, so I think it said something like exceptionally equivalent to an in-person meeting, meaning that, for example, if you got dropped off that meeting, then the meeting, you could complain that your voice wasn't heard, and then the meeting would have to happen again. So you have to have really, really good technology. So we looked into it. Turns out that hybrid meetings are harder than they look. And anybody that was at the Virginia Environmental Justice Collaborative, or the council meeting they had a couple of weeks ago, that was virtual, and we dropped people. Half of the group couldn't see the presentation, half of the group couldn't hear the presentation, and that was taking place in the TDOT room that is designed for that. And the woman that runs the meeting came up and told me in a break, the technician here told me it takes up to 5 technicians to operate a meeting depending on how many people are trying to get in online and trying to queue up to talk. So we looked at the resources and we just didn't have them in order to fully fund that. So we're hoping that in this legislative session, the governor can provide some guidance for that so that we can, because we got great turnout and hybrid meetings were great. But we're kind of in a technology bubble right now. We just don't have the money for it in current funding. It's going to take at least 2 or 3 full-time people. This person, Miriam Kared, who runs it, was just getting run ragged, trying to get people back on the call, trying to get materials to people in real time. I was watching her and getting my mind changed about the efficacy of a hybrid meeting with current resources. So that's the long story to tell you that hybrid meetings are probably not possible in the immediate future, but the DEQ, I think, really wants to move towards that. So we're working, we're going to be working through the budget process perhaps to find a way to get some more money to do this. But we hear you. And I think DEQ agrees, like hybrid meetings would be great. We just want to make sure that we don't lose people's voices in the meeting and that everybody has an equivalent experience, whether they're there physically or whether they're online.
Thank you. I appreciate your answer.
Oh, no problem. No problem.
So what is the balance in your mind between informing communities and getting them access to resources and soliciting ideas and options from the community based on the specifics of their desires and needs? I realize that can bog down projects, but it also has the opportunity to improve those projects from those that live there.
Well, Shauna, you hit the nail on the head. It can improve projects. And I think you will find that industry is interested, because it's not good for business to have angry neighbors and to have people boycotting you and, to have that kind of unrest around your industry. And so it can make your project better. It can improve community relations. I mean, I would really like to see, industry approach the community first and see if they can work out, if there are any differences, work them out. Because I think that's just really good for community relations. And a lot of companies talk about wanting better community relations. It's not just contributing to the baseball team. It's about thinking about how your industry impacts the lives of the people that live there. And I think industry is just really not, I think the black eye is becoming intolerable for industries. And I think they're starting to morph towards better community engagement. So for me, I really feel like the more engagement you can have with the community, just the better it is. And, expecting that the first few attempts are probably going to be awkward. And, how do we make these projects, some projects, are just going to happen and maybe the community can make a deal. I don't know. I mean, I can't really speak for the agency or the community, but I just can't get over the fact that often what happens is these projects appear as if they came out of nowhere overnight. And surprising people is never good, and so if we can at least avoid the surprise, I think we're doing something beneficial.
Maria, you have a question?
I actually do. In listening to the conversation, we're talking about water equity, right? And we all know that it's so vital to a healthy ecosystem. Yet when I had these conversations with the public at large, they're very generalized in their understanding about the actual impact, because everybody wants good cleaning water. No one wants to drink water that may cause problematic issues, and everybody likes the idea of plants and wildlife. They similarly also like the idea of creating new living spaces that are sustainable living places. And let's face it, we are the second largest county in Virginia, and the demographics are there to say that we're continuing to grow. My question is really around how we are advertising that, because what we know about marketing and advertising is that they really understand like the neuroscience of priming and using education to kind of create the take the known to the unknown, or however they want to take it. But I'm asking, when we talk to the public at large, are we being very intentional about showing them places where this already exists so that they can see communities that are really prioritizing water equity, environmental equity, and at the same time still building on their community, growing as industry? Do we have those models, and how often are we putting that out to the public? Because when I speak to the public, there's a lot of fear, and because change for folks is a fearful state. What does this mean for me? What does it mean when we grow? What does this mean for taxes? How will this impact me? So as a community, you have a lot of pockets of individuality looking at this big picture and saying, what is in it for me? And so how are we doing with intentional marketing and education to clarify some of those myths around environmental equity? And what models are we constantly putting out there to show them, look, this is a great way to move towards, and it benefits everyone.
Mhm.
I know I said a lot, but I just had a lot on my mind.
Yeah. I think that is the big dilemma. We've become a society of me. What's in this for me? And we're not a society of like, gosh, if it's good for you, I bet it'll be good for me. We need to have clean water for everyone. Oh, need to have clean water for me. What's in it for me? And so I think just societally, we're sort of in this real swing of just being very tunneled in about me. And I'm hoping that society swings back to a more community frame. But until that happens, what are we going to do in the meantime? Because we can be doing things to perpetuate a swing towards, equity and justice. And so, for these communities, like I am hard pressed to think of a community that isn't within 20 years that is actually thinking about all of those things. And I think that's where we need to get to. Municipalities need to start thinking about the work that they do in an equity frame. How is this affecting the community? Yes, I know we need jobs, but do the jobs in this community always have to be these kinds of jobs? Can't we be looking at this at a certain area and say, they've got enough of those jobs. Let's try some of these other jobs. How can we shape that? And I think there's some movement in our economic development agencies where they're like, look, just if I know more about and what they say, that's interesting. If I know more about communities, I'm more interested in engaging them. And so within the agencies, we want to increase that knowledge of, what communities, do we need to, because of previous systemic racist, policies, do we need to protect? And I think that's kind of the first step. And while I don't necessarily want to go out and label communities a certain way, I'm very sensitive about the way we talk about environmental justice communities. And I've been mostly saying environmental justice communities because I want to keep away from the negative frame. I want to keep it top of mind that we have a lot of systemic racism that has contributed to the current situations in these communities. But I don't always want these communities thought of as underserved, underprivileged, under-resourced, because after a while, that's how you think of people that live there.
Renee, you're right about the fact that when you focus on negativity, you just create more of it. It's a reinforcement. And so that's why my question was around really looking at where we can become and focusing on where we can become, right, and giving people models of places where that already has occurred. Mm-hmm. Because if we can't see where we're going and see where people have already landed, it then becomes very abstract. And we're wired to think, and I'm just talking about the neuroscience of it, we're wired to think on a more negative basis as human beings than over anything else. So to override that, what are the intentional showings of, look at these communities. There were once where you are, and this is where they are now, and this is where we can be now. Because if you focus on where you're standing, you don't move. Mm-hmm. And yet that tends to be the approach of always highlighting, these are all the problems, but that's where it stays. So I'm asking you, Renee, because you've been in California and you've been across the U.S., so you've seen models who have literally said, we're going to change, and we're going to create sustainable living environmental justice is going to be in place, and now this has resulted. And for folks who are don't know what that looks like, it can become a very fearful state to be in. And that's when community shows up and says, we're not sure that what you're bringing us is the right thing. But education is so powerful, and showing people places where we have flipped the script, where they are like communities to inspire to, I just think is a great way to enter those conversations.
I think you're right. The positive frame is always better, and overriding it is the toughest part. There are lots of communities out there that have made significant changes and have worked on it. I don't know that there's a community that I could say these guys solved all their problems, but there are communities out there that have created really interesting policies. New Jersey just has a new environmental justice law that's pretty cutting edge. I mean, and they came out of nowhere. They didn't have federal requirements to have a stringent environmental justice law. Communities in and of themselves have taken, on the local level, there's often some really good examples. Sustainability, this is something that we need to start investing in. We need to start investing our tax dollars into what these kinds of things are going to look like. And I think, I'm hoping that we're getting there. Like I said, I've seen some press releases coming out now that are funding equity programs so that we can start building those models. Because we need to. You're right. If we don't have anything to show people, like this could be the future, people aren't necessarily willing to go there. And sometimes I'm afraid that the future often looks good for those that have means. I mean, I think there are plenty of those communities that are well off. We've got to have that same vision for communities that have, labored under systemic oppression for, hundreds of years. And any help, I'm always looking for help and ideas. There's my contact information. So I'd love to have offline chats with you and meet again to discuss these things, because I think the discussion and the dialogue is what's been missing, I think, from state agencies to communities, and we've just got to have more of that. Thank you so much, Maria. I see Veronica. Do I have time to talk to Veronica?
Yeah, we're coming up on the hour, but yeah, Veronica, you want to go ahead and...
Thank you, Renee, for joining us in this discussion. I'm the Water Quality Programs Coordinator for Prince William Soil and Water Conservation District, where I actually started as a volunteer because I had a knowledge in sustainable development or environmental sustainability, as you said, from the Mid-Sweden University. And I'm grateful to the Board of Directors of Prince William Soil and Water Conservation District, who gave me that opportunity to start as a volunteer. And today we are having this discussion. And I'm so happy that I had the opportunity to be part of such a discussion with EPA during the National Water Quality Monitoring Conference. And that is what has made me, to be able to have an input. Actually, with regards to Ms. Maria Bugo's questions, which you also try to emphasize on, normally with my experience in Prince William County, most of it comes with a lot of challenge. And for sure, we should know that we have institutional stumbling blocks, and we also have community stumbling blocks. And in as much as DEQ is working on having staff, to bring all these points in place to help the community grow in the area of sustainability, which my area of concern is clean water, as that has been my experience in Prince William County. There is one appeal I would like to make to you as somebody who has been working in the community, and especially here in Prince William County, that of holistic interaction. It should be a form where everybody should be brought together to help in solving this problem. And I know that in as much as we talk about justice, equity, as you said, there are words that a lot of folks don't want to hear. But personally, my sense of direction and the way I look into what I'm doing is in the area of sustainable development. So if we have everybody like DEQ trying to work with the community, bring not people working in different sections, but bring everybody together I think we're going to have some success in what we're talking about and looking into the right direction. I'm so glad we are here today and to have you put more lights on this topic. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I
Well,
really, no, go ahead.
I'm sorry. I was going to say we're over time. If you want to just finish up with your comments and then we'll wrap things up.
Yeah, I just want to say thank you for the opportunity to speak with you. This is an evolving project, and I am open to hearing what you have to say. And if you guys want to do community events or talk again, I would, just contact me with your questions. And if you have ideas of ways we can work together, don't be shy. I'm open to any suggestions. I think we're going to be doing a lot of new things, and we're going to try a lot of things, and it's going to be a really exciting time. And so I appreciate you getting on the call to talk to me, and don't be a stranger.
Well, thank you, Renee, and thank you everybody who joined on the conversation. The video of this recording will be on YouTube by the beginning of next week. We'll be sending out that link with an evaluation. That evaluation helps us be responsible to our stakeholders, both public and private. And hopefully we'll have more discussions like this. Thank you so much, Renee.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Y'all have a good one.
I'm gonna jump on a boat.
With Barb.
Come down to Richmond. Jump on the James.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much.
Have a good day, everyone.
All right.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. Bye-bye.